Richard Lawson was a self-made businessman who had built Lawson Enterprises from a small startup into a billion-dollar company. At 65, Richard had everything money could buy: a sprawling mansion on 6 manicured acres, a fleet of luxury cars, and more wealth than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Richard's journey hadn't been easy. Born to a factory worker father who taught him about hard work and loyalty, Richard had started with nothing but determination and intelligence. He met his wife Elaine at university when she was a beautiful young woman from a respectable family, and he was just an ambitious student with big dreams. As Richard's success grew, so did their family. Nathan, their eldest at 36, had his father's ambition but lacked his patience and people skills. He worked at Lawson Enterprises, constantly pushing for more responsibility and authority. Daniel, 32, had never shown interest in the family business, preferring to enjoy his trust fund on expensive vacations and even more expensive relationships. Only Emily, 28, seemed untouched by the family wealth. Despite her privileged upbringing, she chose to work for a small non-profit helping homeless children, living in a modest apartment in the city against her parents' wishes. Life changed in an instant on a cold, rainy Tuesday evening. Richard was driving home from work when his car slid on the wet road and smashed hard into a concrete barrier. The crash was loud and sudden. When the paramedics arrived, Richard was barely awake, his body broken and weak, struggling to hold on to life. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors scrambled desperately to save him. Soon, Elaine and their children arrived at his bedside. Dr. James Mitchell, the chief neurologist, emerged after long hours of tests. "Mrs. Lawson," he began solemnly, "your husband has suffered significant trauma to the temporal and frontal lobes. We won't know the full extent of the damage until he regains consciousness, but you should prepare yourselves for the possibility of memory loss and cognitive decline." When Richard finally opened his eyes late that evening, the transformation was immediately apparent. His sharp, commanding gaze was now vacant and confused. He stared at Elaine as if she were a complete stranger. Who are you?" he whispered. Elaine's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "Richard, it's me, Elaine, your wife." Richard's brow furrowed with concentration, but recognition never came. "Wife?" he repeated, the words sounding foreign on his lips. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." By the time all 3 children arrived, the pattern was established. Richard recognized no one. Not Nathan, not Daniel, not even Emily, who took it hardest, tears streaming unchecked down her face as she clutched her father's unresponsive hand. After spending weeks in the hospital, Richard was finally sent home. He was placed in a guest room downstairs. It was one of the smaller rooms in the house, hidden in a quiet corner of the mansion, far from where the rest of the family stayed. Richard's first week at home passed in a blur of doctor's visits and therapy sessions. Elaine maintained a mask of patient devotion, helping Richard when he spilled food and guiding his hand when he became frustrated with simple tasks. "It's all right, darling," she would say, dabbing at spilled soup with a napkin. "We're going to get through this together." But by the second week, small changes began to appear. The meals moved from the dining room to Richard's bedroom, served on trays that sometimes sat untouched for hours. The daily therapy sessions Elaine had initially arranged were reduced to 3 times a week, then twice. One morning, as she stood by the dining table, already dressed and with her hair perfectly styled, Elaine said to Richard, "I've got that charity luncheon today. The nurse will be coming later, and Emily said she'll stop by this afternoon." She gently placed a cup of tea in front of him. As Richard reached for it, his hand trembled slightly. The teacup wobbled, then tipped over, spilling hot tea across the table, and soaking some of the papers lying there. "I'm so sorry," he exclaimed, reaching for a napkin. Elaine's hand struck his arm sharply. "Don't touch anything. You'll only make it worse." "Why do you have to be so useless?" she hissed, yanking the wet papers away. "This is important paperwork, Richard, not one of your silly games." Richard rubbed his hand, letting his hurt show. "I didn't mean to." "You never do you?" Elaine interrupted. "You never mean to forget who we are or spill things or be a burden. But here we are anyway." By the third week, Elaine's visits to Richard's room had become brief appearances in the morning and evening, often distracted and hurried. His meals became irregular, sometimes missing entirely if the staff forgot or were too busy. His laundry piled up in the corner, his sheets unchanged for days. One particularly dreadful day, Richard wet himself because no one answered his calls for help. When Elaine finally arrived, she barely disguised her disgust. Richard was left sitting in the soiled clothing for another hour before being cleaned up. That night, he overheard Elaine on the phone talking to someone. "It's like having a child again, but worse. He doesn't even recognize me half the time. I didn't sign up for this." In the midst of this neglect, alarming news from the company began to reach him through Emily. "Nathan's been making reckless decisions, Dad," she confided one afternoon. "He fired 3 loyal executives last week. The company's stock has plunged by 15% in just 2 weeks. Richard's eyes glazed over as he tried to grasp the unfolding crisis. Meanwhile, Nathan and Daniel never showed any concern for their father's well-being. All they cared about was the company and money. Only Emily seemed genuinely concerned, visiting regularly with nourishing meals, clean clothes, and kindness. Her anger simmered as she watched her father's deterioration, neglected, forgotten, increasingly frail. One afternoon, Emily noticed a red rash on Richard's neck. "This looks painful, Daddy. How long has it been there?" Richard shrugged helplessly. "When was the last time you had a bath?" Emily asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Don't remember," Richard mumbled. Emily's eyes flashed. "I'm going to speak with Mom about this. Wait here." Through the open door, Richard could hear Emily confronting Elaine in the hallway. "Mum, Dad has a rash all over his upper body. He hasn't been bathed in days. Where is the nurse who's supposed to be helping him?" "Lower your voice, Emily," Elaine replied coolly. "The nurse quit, said she had a better offer. I'm interviewing replacements next week." "Next week?" "Dad needs care now." "And what about his meals? There's nothing in his mini-fridge, and the plate on his side table looks like it's been there for days." "I've been extremely busy managing everything while you're at work," Elaine said defensively. "It's been overwhelming." "But you've been out every day this week. I saw the posts from your lunch at the club yesterday, and the shopping trip with Mrs. Whitmore." "I'm entitled to some breaks, Emily. You have no idea how stressful this situation is." "This situation is your husband being ill and neglected," Emily's voice rose. "If you can't handle it, we need to hire more help." As the weeks passed, Richard's condition seemed to worsen. He often failed to recognize family members, became confused about basic facts, and struggled with simple tasks. Dr. Mitchell, during his follow-up visits, spoke of progressive deterioration and diminishing cognitive function. Meanwhile, the dynamics of the Lawson household shifted dramatically. Nathan took control of Lawson Enterprises with alarming efficiency, making sweeping changes that sent the company's stock into volatile swings. Daniel began appearing in social media posts from Monaco, Ibiza, and St. Bart's, always with different women, always flaunting a lifestyle that suggested unlimited resources. Elaine started spending most nights with friends, returning in the mornings disheveled and smelling of unfamiliar cologne. On the rare evenings she stayed home, she hosted intimate dinner parties from which Richard was excluded. Emily's visits remained the only constant in Richard's deteriorating world. She brought him proper meals, helped him bathe, and ensured his room was clean. She read to him from his favorite books, played music he had once enjoyed, and spoke to him not as an invalid but as her father. "I don't understand what's happening to this family," she confided one evening as she sat beside him. "Nathan's running the company into the ground. Daniel's spending money like water, and Mom—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "What about Mom?" Richard asked, his voice weak. Emily hesitated. "She's just not herself, Daddy. I think she might be seeing someone. I saw her with a man yesterday. They looked intimate." Richard nodded vaguely, as if her words barely registered. "I've tried talking to them, all of them, but they won't listen to me." Emily's voice broke. "Nathan says I'm being dramatic, that you're getting the best care money can buy. But you're not. Your clothes aren't clean. You're not eating properly. You've developed bed sores because no one helps you move." She took his hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I'll fix this, Daddy. I promise." The next day, Richard overheard a conversation that chilled him to the core. He had shuffled to the hallway outside his room when voices drifted from the library, Elaine, Nathan, and Daniel in heated discussion. "We need to consider a more permanent solution," Nathan was saying. "He's taking up too much of our resources." "What kind of solution?" Elaine asked. "There's a facility outside the city, Oak Grove Care Home. Not too expensive, but they can handle patients like Dad. Full-time care." "A nursing home?" Elaine sounded hesitant. "What would people say?" Daniel's voice cut in. "Who cares what people say? Dad doesn't even know where he is half the time. The money we're spending on his care could be better used elsewhere." "Emily will never agree to it," Elaine said. "Emily doesn't get a vote," Nathan replied coldly. "Dad's medical power of attorney is in your name, Mom. You make the decision." "Get me more information about this place," Elaine finally said, "and figure out how to handle Emily. I don't want a scene." Richard slowly retreated to his room, his heart pounding in his chest. One weekend, when Emily was away on a mandatory work retreat, Elaine informed Richard they were going for a drive. Nathan and Daniel loaded him into an SUV with a single suitcase of belongings and drove him to Oak Grove Care Home. Oak Grove Care Home stood in stark contrast to the luxury Richard had known. The building was dreary, with peeling paint and an institutional atmosphere. His room was small and sparse, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking a parking lot. "This is your new home, Dad," Nathan explained, like he was talking to a small child. "The doctors here will take good care of you." Richard looked around the small bare room with its narrow bed. "I don't understand. Where's Elaine? Where's my home?" "This is better for you, Dad," Daniel said, patting his shoulder. "You need special care now." "We'll leave you to get settled in," Nathan said. "We'll visit soon." They didn't, of course. For 2 weeks, Richard sat in that small room, experiencing firsthand the neglect that permeated the facility. The staff was overworked and undertrained. Meals were bland and sometimes forgotten entirely. Richard's physical condition began to deteriorate rapidly. The lack of proper nutrition, hydration, and movement took its toll. His skin grew pale, his muscles weakened from disuse, and painful bed sores developed on his back and hips. When Emily finally found out where her father was, she came rushing in with tears in her eyes. "I can't believe they did this," she cried, embracing him tightly. "They waited until I was away, and now they won't even speak to me about it." Emily looked around the dingy room with horror. "This place is awful. Have they even visited? Have they seen how they're treating you?" Richard shook his head slightly. "The man at the front desk said no one from the family has called to check on you since you arrived," Emily said, her voice breaking. "And look at you. You've lost weight. Your skin is so dry." Emily visited every day after that, bringing him decent meals, clean clothes, and small comforts for his room. She helped him bathe and shave, carefully treating the bedsores that had begun to form on his back. For 3 weeks this pattern continued, Emily fighting a seemingly impossible battle against neglect and indifference, while Elaine, Nathan, and Daniel carried on with their lives, unbothered by Richard's deteriorating condition. One day, Emily arrived at Oak Grove with determination in her eyes. "I've spoken with a lawyer, Dad. We're going to fight Mom for guardianship. This neglect has to stop." Richard nodded weakly. "But first, I need to get you ready. We have a hearing date in 2 weeks, and I want you to look your best when we go to court." Emily pulled out a clean shirt and began to help him dress. "The lawyer thinks we have a good case because of all the documentation I've collected about your care here." As she buttoned his shirt, Emily continued, "Nathan and Daniel are furious. They've threatened to cut me off financially if I go through with this, as if I care about their money. And Mom?" She sighed. "Mom won't even take my calls anymore." That afternoon, as Emily helped Richard walk slowly around the facility's small garden for exercise, she shared more news. "The company's in trouble, Dad. Nathan fired so many key people that clients are leaving in droves. The stock has dropped almost 30%. And Daniel's been taking money from the company accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars." Richard took this information in silently with a look of confusion. "The board is talking about removing Nathan as CEO," Emily continued. "They've been reaching out to me, if you can believe it. They think I might know where your backup plans are stored, the contingency documents you created for emergencies." Richard stopped walking, leaning heavily on Emily's arm. "Are you tired, Dad? Let's sit down." She guided him to a bench. "Anyway, I told them I don't know anything about company documents, but it shows how desperate things have become." Later that evening, as Emily was preparing to leave, she hugged Richard tightly. "2 more weeks, Daddy. 2 weeks and we'll have our day in court. Just hold on." After she left, Richard sat alone in his room, staring out the window at the darkening sky with tears streaming down his face. It was a particularly rainy evening when Emily arrived for her usual visit, only to find Richard's room empty. She started panicking until a nurse pointed her toward the facility's small garden room. There she found Richard, but not as she expected. He sat in an armchair by the window, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, his posture straight and commanding. Gone was the confused, vulnerable man she had been visiting. In his place sat the father she remembered, confident, sharp, and fully aware. "Dad?" Emily approached cautiously. "What's happening?" Richard smiled at her, his eyes clear and focused. "Hello, Emily. I think it's time we had a proper conversation." Her confusion was evident as she sat across from him. "Your memory? Is it back?" "It never left," Richard said quietly, watching her face as understanding dawned. "I've been aware the entire time." Emily's mouth fell open. "What? But why would you pretend? All this suffering?" "I needed to know the truth," Richard explained, his voice steady. "After the accident, I was dazed but conscious in the hospital before anyone arrived. I overheard the doctors saying I had only minor injuries, but when your mother and brothers arrived, something in their manner gave me pause. A look passed between them, something calculating. I decided to test them." "So you pretended to have amnesia?" Emily was struggling to process this revelation. "I needed to see who would stand by me when I had nothing to offer, who would remain loyal when I was no longer useful." Richard reached out and took her hand. And you, Emily, never wavered, not once. Tears filled Emily's eyes. They've destroyed everything, Dad. The company is failing. Nathan has run it into the ground, and Daniel has stolen millions. Mum's spending money like water and having an affair. Everyone knows about it. I know, Richard replied calmly. I've been keeping track of everything, but what they don't know is that I've also been working behind the scenes. He paused, looking out at the rain. I think it's time to go home. Later that night, Richard and Emily drove to the Lawson mansion, where Elaine was hosting a big party. They walked in together, and the music stopped. Elaine saw him first and dropped her glass of champagne. Richard? Good evening, everyone, Richard said in a strong voice. I thought it was time I rejoined the party. Nathan and Daniel pushed through the crowd, looking confused and scared. Dad, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Oak Grove, Nathan said. Yes, the place you dumped me when I became too much trouble, Richard said coldly. He turned to all the shocked guests. Let me tell you what Oak Grove is really like. It's a place where patients lie in their own dirt for hours because there aren't enough staff to help them, where meals are often forgotten. He looked at Elaine. It's a place my wife never once visited in 3 weeks. She never called to check if I was eating, if I was clean, if I was even alive. Richard, please, Elaine started, but Richard cut her off. I was never sick. I was never damaged. It was all a test to see who in this family actually cared about me, not just my money. Everyone gasped. A test? Nathan repeated. What are you talking about? 3 months ago, I decided to find out who would stand by me if my fortune was gone, Richard explained. So after the accident, I pretended to have brain damage. That's crazy, Daniel stammered. Not crazy, Daniel. Testing, and you all failed terribly, Richard said calmly. My wife quickly got tired of caring for a husband. My oldest son took over my company and ran it poorly. My second son just used it as a chance to take more of my money. Richard turned to his wife and sons again. As of now, Elaine, we are divorced. Nathan, you're fired from my company. Daniel, your money is cut off. You've all shown me who you really are. Richard, you can't just walk away from 34 years of marriage, Elaine said desperately. Wouldn't you have walked away from me if I had really been sick? Richard asked. Would you ever have visited me at that place? Or would you just have forgotten me while enjoying my money? Elaine had no answer. As Richard and Emily left, Nathan called out, Emily, you can't be okay with this. He lied to all of us, including you. Emily looked back at her family. You're right. What Dad did was wrong, and I'm angry about it. But what you all did was worse. You abandoned him, stole from him, and left him in that awful place to die alone. She stood tall like her father. So, yes, I'm going with Dad. His lie came from wanting to know the truth. Yours came from selfishness. In the car, Emily asked, Dad, are you sure about this? They're still family. Richard looked back at the house. No, Emily, you're my family, the only real family I have. He opened the car door for her. Now let's go home, a new home where we can start fresh. I need to teach you about running a company. Emily smiled through her tears. I'm a quick learner. I know you are, Richard said, feeling lighter as they drove away. That's why I'm not worried about the future anymore. As they headed toward their new life, Emily said, Dad, promise me one thing. Anything. No more tests, okay? Just be honest with me from now on. Richard squeezed her hand. I promise, no more tests, just truth. And that's the end of today's story. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more captivating stories. See you in the next one.